just to say that at the end of this presentation, you will receive a certificate, and within the next few days, you'll get a copy of the presentation plus an opportunity to watch again and share with your colleagues. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Debbie Roberts to you. Debbie is an expert in primary science, secondary science, has a broad range of educational experience. She's a consultant and author. Having already listened to this presentation once today, I know you're in for a real treat. Please do use the chat box. Let us know what country you're in, and do engage with Debbie throughout with questions, because she loves to get involved. And Debbie, now over to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Hi, Claudia. Okay, how are you all? So, and greetings from, I can't read that. Is it Tota? In Jakarta. I have fond memories of Jakarta. 5 p.m. there. We're on 10 a.m. in the UK. So welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is where you are. We're looking at digital blended learning in the primary classroom today for science, but you'll see that a lot of the techniques and strategies can actually be cross-curricular, but we will be focusing on science. Before we begin, my cat has made a star appearance already today. I cannot prevent her from doing this. She's now lurking just above my head. Just welcome her. She wants to get involved. That's all I can say. Good afternoon, Belarus. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm a teacher. I know exactly how valuable your time is, so I will make the most of it. Welcome, Russia. Good afternoon there. Please use the chat box, because as a teacher, I really like the interaction, the sharing of good practice. We're not in a position currently to do that at the moment, but the chat box is the best that we can do right now. So I really believe in sharing good practice through, leave your responses, leave your questions, anything that I can answer I will do now, or I'll look at later. So as I always say in my webinars, if I go like that, it's not because I'm dozing off, I'm reading the chat box in the corner there. So please feel free, add comments, make suggestions, ask questions as we go through this webinar about digital blended learning. So the objectives, well, we've all had some kind of interaction with blended learning because of the pandemic. It became extremely topical during the pandemic because it really was, to most of us in education, the only way that we could teach our students was through blended learning. Some of us might be experienced with blended learning and therefore will maximise your knowledge, understanding and use and approaches of blended learning in the primary classroom. As I said, specifically for science this morning, but you'll see that it is cross-curricular. They can be used in other subject areas. We'll look at some strategies and techniques which will support blended learning and support learning in a blended learning environment. So again, some of you might be very experienced with blended learning. This might be introduction to some, and to others, it might just be a reminder, a review of what you already know, and sharing some new ideas, some new approaches that might help your planning in the classroom to increase opportunities to actually involve and engage with blended learning. So why am I interested in blended learning? Well, the key points about blended learning are that there are so many different types. So as an inquiry-based practitioner, I became very interested in blended learning because it actually does support a lot of the skills that are required for inquiry-based learning. So that was my initial interest in blended learning. This is probably 9 years before the pandemic. So it was a new concept to me. And for the people that I worked with, it was new to them also. So that's where I began my interest in blended learning, but it has become increasingly important during the pandemic, which has now sort of been adopted in everyday practice in education. So ultimately, what is blended learning? It can be described as a blend, a true combined blend of traditional face-to-face, classroom-based learning with a digital curriculum. Obviously, when using a digital curriculum, there is some reliance on computers and, of course, the internet. That in itself can cause some issues, and I know this because I've explored and I've used blended learning techniques in the UK in my classroom and around the world, and I know that there are some problems that can occur when using the internet and computers. But if you're planning blended learning truly, if it's a true combination of traditional face-to-face and technology, then we can overcome some of these barriers and we can prevent this becoming an issue when teaching and learning. Lots of teachers have told me that they don't do blended learning. They don't use technology in the classroom because it just causes problems. That's not true. It occasionally causes problems, but if you've planned for blended learning, you can overcome that. So be confident, be open-minded, and have a go. Because as the students become more familiar with the technique and the strategies, they become more engaged. So let's have a look at how we can use that engagement. So blended learning uses the strengths of both face-to-face and technology. Now, I always use these analogies. My children are grown. In fact, my son graduated yesterday as a computer science and technology teacher. So it was his post-grad, his extended graduation, and he's just uses computers and technology. And so I've also learned a lot from him as well. We can't really use the excuse that, yes, but technology is often a problem, because our teachers like him work who just use computers and technology. So let's not use that as an excuse. Let's try and overcome these barriers. So this technique promotes engaging, inspiring lessons for all learners. Now I know from, as I said, my children are grown, but I've got a godson who's 6. I've watched him grow and develop, and lots of my friends have got young children. And I observe them and I watch them using technology. Their skills and confidence are far beyond mine. So the 6-year-old the other day, I was sending an email on my smartphone. I do apologise about the cat. And I was trying to correct something, tapping next to it on the screen. And you know how small the screens are on smartphones. And I couldn't quite correct that letter. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing? All you do is put your 2 fingers on the space bar and you drag it and you're in the right place." I was amazed because they pick it up and they use technology. Why should we stop them? So I watch this and I see their engagement and their skills developing rapidly. We should use these skills in all education, not just in computer-based education. And so blended learning just does that. It uses the skills that they need and they can use better than we can. We don't know what we're preparing our students for. We have no clue what the workplace will look like in 15 years. The pace that technology is moving at the moment is rapid. We can't really predict what they will be doing when they leave education because technology is moving so fast. We can't really show them, oh, this is what a computer will look like. This is what a car will look like. This is what a factory will look like. We don't know. We've no clue. We can't even dream about it really because we're progressing so fast. But what we can do is teach them the skills that they will need. We can teach them resourcefulness, resilience. We can teach problem solving, questioning, research. We can teach these skills now and develop these for their future. In the meantime, blended learning promotes engagement, interest, curiosity, all the things that we want a child to have in the classroom. There is strong evidence to show that when a child is engaged, they will apply themselves more. They will work at a much deeper intellectual level. When students work at this deep intellectual level, they will develop neurological pathways that will place information in their long-term memory, not their short-term memory, which gets clogged up with everything else. Where's my bag? What day of the week is it? Am I late? Am I early? It promotes the storage into the long-term memory, which then can be easily recalled when we need it in assessments. We don't teach to assessments, but that's how we measure progress at the moment. And so therefore, we need to think about these strategies and we need to think about assessments. So they promote inquiry-based learning skills, which can be used across the curriculum. They can be used in the future. We allow children to take responsibility for their own learning and for time management. These are all skills that will be used throughout life forever. When I used to do a lot of CPD about inquiry-based learning, I used to say to teachers, what age, what stage in a child's life will you have the most impact? And teachers always say, well, I teach year 6, so in year 6. I teach year 4, so in year 4. And I say, from the year that I teach them, for the rest of their lives. Because you're teaching skills that they will use for the rest of their lives. When buying a house, when buying a car, they will look at the data, they will analyse it, they will weigh it up, they will draw conclusions. Blended learning is flexible, which has been great during the pandemic. Some positives have come out of the pandemic. We now are very confident users of online resources, of blended learning. It's not only flexible so that when we walk into school, as has happened to all of us, it might be school is closed as of now. School is closed as of tomorrow. A student teacher said to me that he went into school at 5 o'clock. They had a staff meeting and they said, school will be closed this week, but we're not quite sure when. How can you plan your lessons tomorrow if you don't quite know if you'll be in school or not in school? How can you plan a revision session thinking they're getting an exam or an assessment on Friday? And this is the things that we've had to work with, the challenges we've had to address head on. Blended learning affords us that flexibility, but it also affords students the flexibility of working at their own pace, working at their own rate, working towards their goal, working towards a common goal with people arriving at different times, but all at the same destination eventually. Objectives are shared with students. It's powerful if objectives are the design, the planning of objectives are actually shared with students, because then the outcomes become more important. They have ownership of the outcome. They understand the expectation of the final outcome because they've been involved in the development of the objective. Therefore, the outcomes are improved. So the environment, the learning environment, whether it be in the classroom, at home, remote learning is not just at home. Remote learning doesn't mean remote from the school. It can mean remote from that learning environment. It could be in a after-school club, a homework club, a lunchtime club, a preschool club. It can be in a different room where it's quieter, where students are working in a different way. Remote learning doesn't just mean at home. So it's extremely flexible so that all learners, regardless of their stage or age, can access a personal learning, which is what educators, as teachers, that's our dream. That's what we really want to achieve. How can we do that? Well, about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, when I first started working in blended learning, no one in my immediate circle, no one with my immediate colleagues had any understanding of blended learning. I asked people for support, for advice. No one knew anything about it. At that time, when I first started researching blended learning, there was about 3 types of blended learning. As I progressed further, I found that there were a few more, maximum 12. So that's about 10 years ago. The most common types of blended learning, there were about 12, and many of them overlapped massively to be maybe 3 distinguished sets. And the reason for that is because all it is, as with this quote, is a merging of physical and digital learning spaces which complement one another, which personalise the learning of all learners, all students, and these are based on authentic human circumstance and prevailing local technology. I think that sums up blended learning. So the 12 types that I first encountered were described as these headings. Some of them are bizarre. As we look deeper into blended learning, we realise that there are even more bizarre and strange titles. But actually, the process, the techniques, the strategies are very simple, but very easily explained. So we have things like lab rotation and station rotation. These are great for science, actually. We use these immensely in science. We use these naturally in science. We often use them in areas where we'll use a carousel or a circus of activities so that children can engage in everything. One of the purposes for this is that we might have limited resources. We might not have a full class set. Due to different circumstances, I found myself teaching a class of 60. The school I worked in did not have 60 sets of electrical equipment. So we worked in stations or circuses of events to allow everything, to allow everyone to access all of the information. So lab rotation and station rotation are really good techniques to use for blended learning in science because we often use these anyway. Individual rotation, you can see that that's lab, station and individual are just a rotation, just a carousel, just individual different activities that are used one after the other. Self-directed is where students direct their own learning. Project-based, again, is something I'm passionate about because in inquiry-based learning, project-based blended learning is a huge part of inquiry-based learning. So project-based is a passion of mine. Lots of the books that I've written, I've always fought to include projects because they do lend themselves really well to blended learning. Inside out, outside in, we'll explore those in detail shortly. Supplemental, that's where one supplements the other, one helps the other. I love the flipped classroom. That's just where they're learning more at home or remotely than they are in front of you. You know, we know that children learn more from their peers than they do from us, worryingly. In an inquiry-based classroom, the teacher is not stood at the front. The teacher could be anywhere. In remote blended learning, the teacher's not even in the same district, maybe. Might be somewhere else completely. I've run lots of blended learning teaching events from my house in the UK, and people from Russia or the Caribbean have been able to engage with these. And the nice thing about it is, look at us now. This is blended learning. There are people from Russia, people from India, people from Egypt. We're not even in the same country. We're not even in the same area at all. But we're all engaging in the same learning. So that's why I love blended learning. So there were 12 most common types that we've just looked at briefly. But actually, if you look now, especially after the pandemic, because it's become so topical, everyone's engaged in it, everyone's interested in it, because everyone's using it. We've now learned, hello Greece, welcome. I haven't left you out, I just didn't know you were there. Please use the chat box, let me know where you are, let me know you're there, let me know you're engaged and listening. Welcome Brazil, how are you? Good to be with you, Brazil, Greece, Russia, everywhere today. Please keep it coming. So we had 12 and we now know there are thousands. If you look, oh, welcome Thailand. Hello there to you. So if you look now, if you did a Google search, now please don't, because I want you to stay here with me, but if you did a Google search now, you would literally find thousands of different names of blended learning. But you know what? Now you're experts, or will be shortly. You'll see that they actually do really come down to about 3 or 4 different types. So don't be overwhelmed by it. Don't be intimidated by it. You know what you're doing. We will look at blended learning so that you will see you don't have to spend a long time planning it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money either. Because blended learning involves integrated courses online with face-to-face. Can be in the classroom, can be at a distance, face-to-face. So we're face-to-face now, but we're also using technology. Perfect blended learning. It's a mixing and combination of everything we've got. I'm passionate about it because it's inquiry-based, it's skills-based, it's project-based. But more importantly, the children are experts. If you give a child a textbook and you give a child an online resource that's got the same information in it, which will they choose automatically? They will choose the technology. They'll choose the use of technology every time. And so let's use that. Let's use it. Let's be confident to use it. This is an example of station rotation. So this is a classroom that's been set up with different computer screens around the room, or it could be books around the room, a model that progresses different models. It could be, using different human body models. It could be using different diagrams at each station. And the idea is they move from one to the other and build on their understanding in their comfortable zone, away from you, stood at the front row teaching them. They move around and they explore different things. This one is actually, they're just like A3 worksheets that are diagrammatic with bits of information, and they just move around them and use the information in a circus or carousel of activities. It could be as individuals, one person. It could be with a study buddy. It could be in small groups, 3 or 4, just moving around, picking up information, talking about it, gathering information, then moving on. You know, I've run these sometimes where you ring a bell or blow a whistle, time to move on. You've got enough information from there, time to move on. Or it could be less directed, where you just say you need to move around this within the lesson, obviously making sure that's exactly what they're doing. I've thrown this in here right at the start because I wanted to show you that we can develop and use blended learning without having to use any resources that we're not used to. This is just something I literally, when I started this session, I'm not promoting any books or anything here. This is the only book I had. I had this Maths Science primary book because although I've written 150 books, I don't necessarily have lots of copies of books at home, and I'm working from home. So if there are any pictures, I've used this. And then I remembered whilst using that book that there are lots of Maths Science online resources. So because I needed lots of examples, lots of pictures to share with you today, I actually went onto the Maths Science online resources, the teacher resources, and I thought, right, I'll put this in at the beginning. So you might be encouraging some station rotation, and you might be not fully aware of what the children have learnt before or how well they understood it. They might have come from a different school. They might be in year one where you don't know what they've done before. And so rather than assessing every child in this content area, I've just shown that, okay, we're learning about light and dark, we're looking at shadows. Potentially they should have learnt shadows last year or maybe 2 years ago, but I'm not quite sure. So how can I assess that easily using blended learning? I've used this online resource. I wouldn't ask a child to define a word unless I was pretty confident they'd come into contact with it before. I'd ask them to define a word when they'd used it a little bit, when they were more into it, when they understood it a bit more. And so what we've got here is just a screenshot of an online resource, which just happens to be a dictionary. So we could say to the children, find out what shadows actually mean scientifically. What do they mean to you? Do you recall using them? Reflect on your own understanding of it. This could be an easy way to say, off you go, this is a really good resource, see what you can find out. So that's a very simple, easy example of blended learning. In a lab rotation, this could be a computer lab. So don't automatically think, oh, it's a science lab. It could be a science lab. And you could have different activities, investigations that build up to a big investigation. You might have some students that are really, really good at planning, so don't keep repeating planning. They might be really good at planning, but they might not be great at collecting data. So have an investigation almost broken up into planning, investigating, recording results, analysing results, drawing conclusions. They could actually work around that, or you could direct children to certain parts of it. So they're not completing a proper, complete investigation experiment, but they are working through the steps of the investigation. You could do that. It could be a computer lab where you've got computers with different activities at different stations. So each of these computers are set up, if you can see that, they're all actually set up the same. You could have it so that there's a PowerPoint presentation on all of the computers and the children sit there and work through the presentation. That's lab rotation also. Or they could actually physically move around each computer. There are bonuses and downfalls really to both, aren't there? Because if they're sat in one place, some primary children, well, all learners, I've seen it with, adults, get a little bit fidgety and bored if they were in one place for too long. So you might want them to get up and move around, stretch the legs, arch the back, have a little space away from the learning environment. You might want them to move around. So that's lab rotation. They're using computers and they're moving around the computers, or they're moving around the software that's actually on the computer. Remote blended learning is probably the one that we're most familiar with at the moment, or the one not necessarily familiar with. It might be the one that we've had the most experience with because of the pandemic. We've done a lot of remote learning. It's funny, but yesterday at my son's graduation, they're all graduating as teachers, and my son actually said to me, "No more snow days." Now, lots of us around the world, I guess in Brazil, Claudia, I guess you've not witnessed a snow day. In Greece, I'd say I'm very familiar with Greece, and yes, they've had snow days. I was once in Crete when there was a snow day. Countries like Russia, UK, we definitely know what a snow day is. So for people who live in nice warm places like Brazil and Thailand, a snow day is we get up for work and it's snowing. The school decide it's not safe to ask students to travel into school. It's not safe because we can't get as many teachers there because some of the teachers might work remotely, a long way from the immediate area. And so we decide there's too much snow, we can't get to school today. Now, in my experience, that was yay! The children all loved it because they get to play out in the snow. They play making snowballs, sliding, sledging, and have a great day away from learning. What do the teachers do? They have a day away from learning as well, because way back we didn't have access to our work that was at school, and we might not have brought any home. So we had a snow day as well. We had a day off teaching. And then technology came along. On a snow day now, we email all the children and we say, look at page number 36 on this website. And the children work and look out of the window at the snow day, and the teachers interact with the students online, and we use blended learning. So no more snow days, which is quite sad, but no loss of learning either, which is quite good. So actually, this enriched virtual learning works really well. Now, I've shown you a page here. We don't need you to rush out and buy things. We don't need you. What we want you to do is think about what blended learning is and be so confident that you can actually use what you've got. So this is just a page. This is a page from the online teaching resources. And the students can actually complete this work completely at home. In between then, I contact the teacher, because on the toolbar there, you've got access to writing notes. Look, there they've written a note, a wonderful note. They look different. What's happened to them when they've been baked or cooked? What's happened when they've been heated? They look different. That could be a note to themselves, or it could be actually answering the activities to the teacher. The teacher can interact with them virtually immediately, or you might go back and use them just the same as you would if a class of students had written in an exercise book, a textbook, in a book, a workbook, or engaged like this. They could all actually be sat in front of you on a tablet or a computer, working on this in front of you in the classroom. That's true blended learning. No, some of them don't just want them using. I understand that completely. Some parents do not want all the learning. This is blended learning. This is blended learning. So far, all we've looked at is the use of technology. In a minute, we'll look at different kinds of blended learning, which is not just using technology. For the moment, we're just looking at use of technology. And here, we're looking at it enriched virtual. We're using virtual resources to enrich their learning. So in the classroom, you could have taught a lesson, they could have modelled some clay, they could have baked some bread, they could have heated up a copper wire. Depends what resources you've got. They could have been engaged in a hands-on investigation, and then this they could have completed at home or virtually online in front of you in the classroom to review their understanding, to review their engagement in the activity. So no, we don't want all remote or use of technology. In fact, I'm carrying out research for a PhD which compares how students learn using technology to traditional based paper books. So yes, I understand that point completely. This is another idea from a book. This again is online. They could use the paper book or they could use the online book. This is just showing you some of the amazing resources that you can use. This is looking at an interesting fact, which that student could look at that interesting fact and decide that they're really interested in that. Actually, what does happen during an eclipse? It might not be part of your curriculum, but they might be so interested that they can actually be prompted to research that. You've also got highlighting of words. You've got the online dictionary again being used there, and the checklist. And the checklist is a great way to review their understanding and the learning. So again, we don't want to be using remote uses of technology all of the time, but we're not saying that. We're saying it's blended. It's blended with traditional learning. Flex blended learning. This is where the backbone, if you like, of the learning is online. But then we've got bits of offline learning, which could be traditional face-to-face, teacher-led learning. A great way to use this kind of flex learning is to set the students with a challenge, a research challenge. Find out about something that's interesting. Again, use your books, use your resources, use the deeply researched by authors, facts and interesting information as a prompt to engage the children into some kind of research. Bring them back from the research. And again, it doesn't have to be done at home. There could be research in front of you with a book or some kind of online resource using the internet or an online resource like this. They research, they find out, and then they come back into the classroom. Debrief. They love that word, debrief. Debrief. What have you found out about? Who found this? Where did you find that? Is that a reliable resource? Can you see how we're learning about how to use these skills that we were using in future careers? Feed back to them. Is that true? Is that correct? Identify misconceptions straight away. Is that correct? Do we all agree? Maybe not. Let's think about that for a second. Okay, so you found out online that this is a correct thing to say, but actually we know it's not now. What does that tell us about using online resources? They're not always reliable. Check and double check, make sure they are. They might then make something or engage in an activity based on all this information in the classroom. I hear what you're thinking. We haven't got time to do this. We've got to catch up. Our children have missed a lot of learning. We can't afford to be wasting our time on this. Right, let's stop for a second. Who are we catching up with? Okay, you're trying to catch up what you did 2 years ago. Well, forget that, you can't. There's one thing that we can't control, and that's time. That time's gone. We're all catching up. We're all trying to catch up. But what's the most important thing to teach children? Skills. I knew someone, and years ago, who told me that over the summer break, they had learned every single flag of the world, every currency that was used in every single country in the world. in every language that was used in every country. So they knew the flag, the country, the currency, and the language that was spoken. Is that any use now? No. Mostly all of the flags have changed. Nearly all of the currencies have changed. The most common language is Spanish. What was the point of learning all that? Can you imagine how long it took that student to learn all that information? 20 years on, is that information of any use? Not really. Not unless you're teaching the history of geography. Not really any use at all. The researching, very useful. The revision, very useful. The actually getting it into the long-term memory from the front, short-term memory, very useful. So can you see that spending time on flex blended learning and other types of blended learning that promote the skills are actually an incredibly good use of time? The content, not so much. The skills should come first, the content after. Flipped classroom. This can be done in so many different ways. Students find out or research remotely. They study and practice in the traditional type of classroom in great detail, supported by teachers and peers. They study further. Again, doesn't have to be using the internet. This says research remotely. This is not about necessarily using technology. This is flipping the classroom around. Notice not flipping it over, flipping it around. We might complete with peers outside school or in school. We might complete with the teacher's support in school. We might complete with the support of parents at home. We might research at home, we might research in school. We might study further at home, we might study further at school. This could be the grounding for a massive, challenging project that you're going to introduce. Some science of the year competition where the boundaries are set out, where you've got to produce something. You might decide that they could do a lot of that work remotely and then complete it in school. You might introduce it in school and then flip it over and complete it at home. Can you see the flexibility? Individual rotation is like the lab rotation, the science rotation, but here students work remotely. Again, this is a great page from this resource, from this one book that I had. This is the online resource that supports it. And can you see that they could actually work through these 3 tasks, plus the extension, plus the research, plus the checklist at their own pace? You know that in science we have different areas. We've got biology, chemistry, physics. You might have a bit of computer science in there, got a lot of maths in there. You've got investigations, you've got concluding, researching, you've got scientific methodology. You've got all this in one subject area. Some students might be flying ahead with something. Some students might be flying ahead with physics. Come to biology, whoa, suddenly the brakes go on. How on earth are we supposed to accommodate that student moving at that pace, that student needing support, that student moving at that pace, and tomorrow that student suddenly, I'm not moving at that pace, I'm not fantastic at science. Let's use blended learning because it is so good at actually individualizing learning. It's so good at being able to allow that student to fly, but then to accept that, do you know what, it's okay. I won't always be working at that pace, and that's fine because I know how to slowly, calmly work through, manage my time. Also using resources like this, can you see where they've actually circled certain things? There are different tools like the pen, the highlighter that can be used. Again, this is my passion, project-based. This is for a competition. So the students are looking at energy resources, very topical at the moment, how it's linked to climate change, what can we do about it. These students have made a model of wind turbines. What's the best wind turbine? How much are wind turbines? How much electricity can they generate? Where's the best place to put it? Could we put it in our area? Could it generate enough electricity for the school, for the community, for the hospital? Fantastic project-based learning, which actually sometimes we think environment change is very important. It's like when you ask a student, when you might say, you'll learn to drive one day. I'm 6 years old. I might not learn to drive till I'm 18. That's a light year away. I'm not bothered. I'm not interested. Climate change, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. I don't pay an electricity bill. I don't have to worry about the lights being on or cooling the house or heating the house. This actually brings all that important science that we want our students to be engaged in the future. We want them to make a difference. Project-based learning can be used like this, where it actually brings it to life to them. They have some ownership of it. Some of the projects, wow, my children never brought projects like that into my classroom, but working together, working in a different environment, using technology, which they love, using different secondary information, secondary data, brings science to life, brings real world science to our individual students, whether they be at home or whether they be in school. Self-directed, again, for that student that's flying, why hold them back? Because the rest of the class didn't absorb the information like you did. I had a classroom with some nursery children a couple of weeks ago. We were looking at counting. The reason I went in is because an expert told me that children should not learn to count, rope counting. And I thought, well, sometimes they do. So I went in. The idea was they looked at counters. You've got more, you've got less. I'd got 2, she'd got 10. One student came up to me and said, yeah, you've got more, I've got more than you. And I said, yeah, I've got less. Great, that was the objective. Another student came up to me in the same class, the same age group, and said, I've got 10 counters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many of you got? 1, 2. Miss, if you give me your 2 to my 10, I'll have 10 counters. That was in the same class. We need to differentiate and support that. Self-directed blended learning, a student might come to you, this is when it's powerful, and say, you told me to look at solar eclipses. I've actually found out that there are also lunar eclipses. Can you tell me what a lunar eclipse is, miss? No, I can't. You go away and you find out. And depending on the ability of the child, depending on your differentiation, you make me a 4-slide presentation and you come back and tell the rest of the class. You might be thinking, that is not on my curriculum. No, it's not. She could be a future scientist. She could be working for, I don't know, space technology. Because she was interested and her teacher allowed that student to go away and immerse themselves into something that they were interested in. And that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. One of my students, who is now a teacher, a head of a science department, remembered that he once asked me, can we make an hot air balloon, miss? Well, what equipment have we got? Yeah, let's do it. So we made an hot air balloon out of a bin bag. He remembers that. That's 20 years ago. But he remembers that, and he is a physics specialist. So don't be afraid of those opportunities. If they have to do the majority at home, if they're interested, they will do. So again, these are some more resources that we can use, especially during times when students have to work remotely. We can use these things, allow them to develop that skill that we rarely have time for. Allow them to develop reflection, review. So can use workbook pages, worksheets, whatever you've got, to actually go away, to sit somewhere away from the classroom. Again, when my son was so young, when he first started school, he's now grown up, he graduated yesterday. He said, I don't like school. Shock, horror. You're 5 years old. Please don't say that. Why? Because it's noisy and there are lots of people. That's true. They're very noisy and there are very lots of people. There are a huge amount of people. So he started coming home with work, sitting in a corner and probably doing what all the other children had done all day. But he was quiet. He was away from that environment. And so he could learn, he could reflect, he could review, he could think. He had thinking space. And that's the beauty of the remote blended learning opportunities, whether they be in the classroom, whether they be at home. It could be sat outside under a tree. But that's their space where they can learn. And blended learning allows that. Inside out blended learning, crazy, crazy, crazy titles. But it kind of makes sense. The learning directed from somewhere else. So you could be actually sending them information. They could be sending you information. Have a go at this and then review what they've actually completed online, or have a go at this activity that might be online or it might be in a book. Inside out blended learning. So they're actually doing the majority at home. The majority of the learning is directed remotely. It's directed outside your face-to-face classroom. If you've ever been on any of my inquiry-based learning training sessions, you'll know about the sage on the stage. Students don't learn from the teacher stood at the front telling students what to do. Students learn with the teacher sat on the floor, sat next to them, sat outside, observing, working together. That's how children learn. That's how we all learn, because we learn from observation and watching people, not necessarily from the teacher stood at the front telling you what you must know and what you must not know. Be aware of that. The continuous mode is just, again, where children have been learning remotely, and it could have been using technology. Continuous, we come back into the school, we put the same thing in an area where groups of children or the whole class can see the same thing, so that we can work through it together, so that they become confident in using the resources, the technology, and so that they also know how to address the questions, how to answer them. Notice here you've got different types of questioning, because in assessments, not only in different countries but within your own school, the assessment questions change, they vary. So give the students opportunities to have a go and then model it. Model how they can engage with that assessment question. For example, the student who said to me in a note on one of these interactive activities, it actually said, I can't talk to you, I'm not in the classroom. The question said, discuss. What a valuable thing to learn when they're sitting their final assessments when they're 14, 15 years old, and it says, discuss global warming. They don't sit there thinking, I can't talk, I'm in an exam. Discuss, I know what that means. Put down the arguments for and against. Valuable lessons, valuable lessons. This is one of the outside in, where they do the majority of the activity outside of the classroom, and then they come back in and they share it and we talk about it and we discuss it and show and tell and what does it mean. I have to say, I put this picture in, I got this picture from somewhere online, and I thought, my students never created anything like that, but I'm guessing there might have been some parental involvement in that, because that puppet is phenomenal. But then, doesn't have to be that grand. What I have learnt, that page there the students started filling it in, and there's either, well, that one is not done online, that one has been brought in, that's a paper one. They've started answering the questions to review their understanding and what they've learned and what they need to learn more about. Supplemental, We supplement the learning that's been involved either in the classroom face-to-face or remotely. We supplement it with online learning. So again, it could be home learning tasks that challenge or extend the learning, or it could be reviews, it could be assessments. It's supplemental. It supplements the learning that's taking place. It's in addition to. So again, for differentiation or for students that are just very, very interested in that particular area, they can extend that further. Here we're using workbook pages. If you've got workbooks or worksheets that are linked to your resources or the learning objective or the content that you're teaching, you can use them in blended learning opportunities. It might be that all the children are sat in the class, all working at their own pace on different workbook sheets, or it could be set for home learning or remote learning outside your classroom. Are we all still there? We've all gone quiet. Not many suggestions or examples just now. I hope you're still all there and can still hear and see. If you are using online tools, make sure that the students understand how to use the tools. Don't think that you're assessing their understanding of the content if it's just that they haven't actually completed the worksheet, or they haven't been able to highlight particular keywords, or they haven't done the presentation PowerPoint or something. It might actually just be that they can't use the online tools. So again, if you can show them, if you're using something online remotely, demonstrate it, model it, make sure they fully understand it and have had an opportunity to engage and have a go before you send them away and then assess their understanding and the learning using the online resources. Mastery-based learning, use what you've got. Here we've got some extensions. As an author of lots of books, I always make sure there's a challenge or an extension or some questions that really expect them to synthesize their understanding of what they should have learned to get the outcome that you want in that learning objective. Students rotate from lots of different types of learning that they've learned, understood, engaged with, and they complete a mastery task. And that can be agreed with you, what the expectation is, what would make a good outcome, what's the bare minimum, so that they can begin to actually take ownership of their understanding and begin to understand what they need to complete by a certain date. So again, you're using online tools, make sure they can use the navigation, make sure they can understand the tools. They can't possibly answer this online science practice unless they can fully use the tools. So again, just be mindful that not all of the students might have engaged as much as others. I really like using personal notes and things and then looking at them later. Again, there's the example where they've written, but they look different. Well, that's the answer. That's correct. Some students will leave notes like, you didn't tell me this. We didn't look at this in class. I've had to research this. Well, that's what we're looking for, particularly in the extensions and the challenges. We want them to be confident to use the tools that you've actually taught them and to synthesize all of the skills, all of the knowledge to arrive at the outcome. So, children don't know how to review and reflect. We have to show them. We have to demonstrate how to think back. We have to model the skill of being brave enough to say, just a minute, we're taking a break. We're putting the brakes on. We're thinking about what we've learned. We're reviewing our understanding. What do I know? What have I learned from this experience? What would I really need to ask the teacher for some more help with? In blended learning, we can ask students to maybe reflect remotely, to take a worksheet home, or to look at an online resource, to go to that quiet space and to not be distracted and to really think deeply about what we understand and what we've learned, and to bring it all together, to take time to pull it all together in that true blended outcome where everything's pulled together and everything links. Allow them to make those neurological links to form those networks by giving review and reflect time. And blended learning, again, lends itself magnificently. There is your very quick and speedy introduction, or introduction to some more techniques, or really, you know, as teachers, use the resources that you've got. Look at resources carefully. Don't think that you have to buy a blended learning book. You've got it all there. Use what you've got. And then we've got, what is blended? My favourite blended learning is definitely project-based blended learning, because it lends itself to absolutely everything. So there we are at the end. Any questions, please type away. I will answer them as much as I can now or later if need be. There's all our contacts. We really, really, really need to learn and listen to you, because we can't address your needs if you don't tell us what they are. So thank you so much for your valuable time. Any feedback is gratefully received, because I'm sat here in a little corner in a room and I have no idea if I've addressed your objective. So thank you so much for taking your time. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did. So over to Amanda at Macmillan.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you all very much indeed for all your time, for your great comments. They're lovely to see them coming through. You will get a copy of this presentation and the opportunity to watch again and share with your colleagues. So as we're out of time, I'm going to close the session, but thanks, Debbie, very much. Another fantastic and informative session, and enjoy the rest of your days wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.